All right, everybody, welcome back. It is I, Van Allen Plexico, and we are here for another exciting episode of All of the Avengers. I warned you that there were two of my favorites coming up in our last episode, and we are here now. Here they are. So, in today's episode, we're going to look at Avengers 45 and 46. These are two issues that I originally read. I mean, they were two of the first Avengers comics I ever read, not because I was that old back when they first came out, but because they were being reprinted in Marvel Triple Action in about 1977. And so I had just started reading the Avengers in the 160s in 1977 and was scouring, the drugstore for more Avengers comics, and saw Marvel Triple Action. And I don't know that I originally understood. I knew they were reprints pretty quickly. It said at the bottom of the splash page, originally presented in Avengers number 45 or whatever. But I didn't really necessarily know what that meant in terms of time. But it turns out that they were about 10 years old. They seemed ancient to me once I realized they were from the mid 60s, late 60s, but it was really only about 10 years that they were running behind the main title. So it also, by the way, just goes to show you how different comics can be over a space of just a few years, right? Like if you look at comics from before 1962, they look very different from comics in the mid 60s. If you look at comics from the mid 60s, they look very different from comics of the early 70s. If you look at comics, from when I started reading them in the mid late 70s, they look very different from comics of the 80s and certainly the 90s and beyond. In fact, I was just a few days ago digging through some of my comics that are stored in the basement, and I came across some. I've been doing these episodes, and I've been reading my older comics on my iPad or reading them here on the computer for these shows, and I haven't read a modern comic in months and months. And so when I found one of my comics from just a few years ago and opened it up, I couldn't believe just how drastically different it was. The coloring, the art, the presentation, everything about it was so different. Comics just change drastically every few years. It's really remarkable how the medium, I imagine television is kind of the same way, but it is remarkable how the medium changes. And because it's such a visual medium, you can really tell, it's striking how much it changes. So these, when I read them as Marvel Triple Action reprints, they seem to me to be, more primitive in a way. That's not the word I'm really looking for, by the way. And I don't mean it in an insulting way at all. I could tell they were older, right? I could tell they were basically a comics generation or two older than what I was reading at the time. Roy Thomas and I think, in fact, is it Don Heck? Yeah. And then John Buscema with that inking that we talked about in the last couple of episodes. You could just tell it was older. But man, the covers look so good, though. Look at that cover there. That is one of my favorite. That is a top 5, easily a top 5 all-time Avengers cover for me. And not just because a friend of mine reproduced it as a cover of one of my Sentinels books. It was the anthology from about like 2008, I believe. Yeah. Not just that, but because it just looks so good. The coloring is so good on it, right? This is what I've said over and over, is like, it feels like those covers back then were painted, and you can just tell it's qualitatively different from anything after. They become a little more monochrome in the 70s, and then more vividly bright in the 80s and 90s, and then they're just completely different by the 2000s. And that's fine, but I really have a thing for those 60s Marvel covers that just look like they were painted. The Super Adaptoid himself there almost looks like watercolor painting. Look at his arm, right? Look at his the shading down here on his hand and his arm here. Doesn't that almost look watercolor like or something? It doesn't look anything like the coloring processes of the 2000s, that's for sure. I just love it. I mean, I always reference that Kang cover where Kang is kind of looming over the, and I think it says something like once an Avenger or something. That one always jumps out at me too. That's an all-time Avengers cover. This one is too. And I like the fact too that that I, you know, comics like that are among my, you know, favorites. When, you know, usually people will say you like what was popular when you first discovered it, right? And there's certainly a degree of truth to that I do love. I love the Avengers of the late 1970s, the Jim Shooter, George Perez, John Byrne, David Michelinie, that whole era. Yeah, I do. But I love these too, and these are from 1967. So it's not just the things that were popular when you first discovered it. So, all right, so we take a quick inventory of the cover here. It's too bad the dang comics code covers up part of the logo. That just does not. That just looks completely out of place there, even without the barcode, right? We're still getting used to the idea that there's no barcode down here in the bottom left corner. But even without that, it just seems weird to have the without something. It's out of place there. So, all right. So Blitzkrieg in Central Park. What a great title. What a great title. The Super Adaptoid. I think he'd appeared a time or two before this. One of my favorite Marvel villains. We start out, just the most interesting thing here is that Thor is flying, being pulled by his hammer. He's kind of in the middle, and Hercules is flying, being pulled by Thor, who's got a rope. So it's an interesting little trio there. The hammer pulling Thor, Thor pulling Hercules. So again, Stanley edited it, but it's a Roy Thomas, Don Heck production. Interesting, they brought Don Heck back for this one. I'm going to suspect maybe Buscema was behind working on, and also this almost has the feel of a fill-in issue, if not for the whole Hercules subplot and Hercules joining the team and everything. I would have said this was a fill-in, that they had done this back when Don Heck was still drawing it and put it as an inventory issue in case they needed it. But it fits the continuity too tightly to not be supposed to fit in here. But it sure does have a lot of the earmark. It's a one-shot, single story. When there haven't been a lot of those lately. It has a lot of earmarks of a one-shot fill-in, but it's really so good. And this is from October of 67, so it was put together sometime probably in the summer of 1967, while everybody was going out to see You Only Live Twice, the last of the Sean Connery, until he came back for Diamonds Are Forever, Bond films, and then Never Say Never Again. So the Avengers are on their way to some kind of a ceremony to celebrate what they've accomplished in the last few issues. They're going out to Central Park for this big ceremony. It's big enough that Thor has come. I believe Iron Man shows up, but also there's this strange normal looking guy in the crowd, but he's got these digital kind of funky mechanical eyes, and we see him as the Super Adaptoid. And I always thought this was a great panel, right? I love this panel where it's him imagining that he's actually the Super Adaptoid, which he is. And I'm not sure if this is how the Adaptoid looked the previous times he's appeared, because I don't know much about the Adaptoid's appearances besides this. I should probably check on that. But this is how he's going to look in this issue. You can see he's got the Hawkeye arrow, arrows and quiver and mask. He's got Captain America's shirt. He's got like Yellow Jacket's wings. Oh, would that have been Yellow Jacket's wings? I guess. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody. But it looks a lot like Captain America, Hawkeye, and Yellow Jacket there. In any case, yeah, we see him fighting from Tales of Suspense, fighting Captain America, getting ready to, he wants to fight Captain America again and destroy him. All right, so the Avengers are there. By the way, Wanda's hair has just gotten jet black at this point. I always think of Wanda as having kind of reddish brown hair, but it does change color over the years. This Black Widow's kind of the same way, right? In later years, hers becomes browner, but in these issues, it's much darker. Jan shows up now that she's a millionaire, and I really do like this costume, right? This is one of my favorite, I think, early looks for Jan. She's come a long way from like the little hat thing, and I like that she's got like almost like a gold lame bodice or whatever with red sleeves and red legs and red gloves and collar and everything. That looks, and I love that she just doesn't wear a mask anymore. She's just a Wasp, and she doesn't have any need to wear a mask, and that's all good. And she's posing on her car. In fact, she said what it was. Oh, her new Mark GT, whatever that is. And then here comes Goliath, and Iron Man and Thor and Hercules. And Hercules is musing about how he wishes he was an Avenger, and he's disappointed that he's not. Showing off, picking up big rocks. Well, Thor and Iron Man are like we've been here for 7 pages. That's way too much. We got to get out of here. So off they go. Thor says, "On to Asgard," and Iron Man's like, "Yeah, see you around." And the Adaptoid is kind of glad they left because he doesn't have to fight him now, but he did absorb some of their powers. Now here comes Captain America with a police escort, which is just awesome. And Avengers Assemble goes out the cry. Now I want to say something about Quicksilver. There's a good and a bad side to what's about to happen with Quicksilver and what Roy Thomas kind of does. When Stan brought Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch onto the team, they never became real characters with their own independent thoughts, right? They were just teammates, and their thought processes usually tended to be limited to we need to, their thought processes usually involved either deciding whose side they were on, if Hawkeye or Captain America or somebody was arguing, and sometimes wondering about their homeland, their origin. They were worried a lot about Wanda when she would constantly, something would happen to her, because that's how Stan wrote women back in the 60s. Okay. There's a few other things, but they were very limited as characters. And one of the things that Roy Thomas does here when he takes over the Avengers is he makes Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch, certainly Quicksilver in these issues, much more interesting. Now, I said there's a good side and a bad side to it. The good side is Quicksilver is becoming a more distinct three-dimensional character as of these issues. He's starting to think things that are contrary to what everybody else is saying and thinking. He's starting to wonder and doubt, okay? And that's good because he's becoming a more well-rounded character. It's bad in that he's starting to turn into the Quicksilver I remember from the 70s when I started reading comics, right? I thought it was interesting when I went back and read these earlier issues, and he was just this nice teammate. I thought, wait a minute, why is Quicksilver being so cooperative and pleasant and nice? That's not the Quicksilver I know, right? I've always said there were 2 characters that's been around Marvel for a very long time that are just a-holes, right? Sorry, there's no other way to put it. These are just Marvel's 2 biggest a-holes, and that is Namor the Submariner and Quicksilver. The 2 of them are arrogant jerks. They always are. And it's interesting because they're like wrestlers. They've both spent time as faces. They've both spent time as heels, right? They've both been heroes. They've both been villains to a degree. But in the case of both of them, when they're being villains, they have justification for it. And they're not like evil, cackling villains. They're just kind of like selfish. I want things my way. I'm mad about how mutants are being treated. I'm mad about how the underwater, how the oceans are being treated. It's always about, I'm going to be reactive to what I see around me and take it out on even my friends, right? That's true of both of them. And the thing is, we're going to start seeing that happen with Quicksilver as of these two issues. And it's gratifying that he's getting some character development, but it's depressing in that he's turning into a character I don't like from a character that I either liked or was at least neutral on, right? I didn't have any reason to dislike him. Okay, so I spoke too soon about the Super Adaptoid's previous appearance. Let me go back and show you. See, in his previous appearance, he didn't have those Thor wings on the side of his head. He just had the Hawkeye mask. Well, now when he pops into the Super Adaptoid again, he's got and I got to admit, these are not the greatest. That's not the greatest look ever. I don't like this panel at all. I like that he starts out as like a normal guy here. Kind of looks like a character from a Parker story, and then just morphs into the Super Adaptoid. But honestly, these things on the side of his head almost look like was it Mordru in the Legion of Superheroes? Has the hat, the fez with the big wings on it that looks so dumb. I love Mordru as a character in Legion of Superheroes. He's their best villain, honestly, in a lot of ways. But I don't like the wings on the side of his fez. He looked like a refugee from one of those Shriner go-kart displays in a parade. We have a lot of those up here in the Midwest. So here comes Super Adaptoid, and he's going to go after Captain America, of course, because that's kind of his purpose, his point. He's growing, using Goliath's power to grow. And again, I really like the idea of him being bigger. When I was a kid and I read this issue, I just thought, okay, the Super Adaptoid is like 20 feet tall or 18 feet tall. Cool. Of course, that's just what he is, right? He's just a big, tall guy. I realized as I got older, oh, he absorbed Goliath's growing powers. Duh. So, from that, every time he appears in the future, I want him to be big. I just think of the Super Adaptoid as like a big, tall android, like I said, like an 18-foot tall android. Or, I mean, in that picture, he's more like, what if those people are like 5.5, 6 feet tall? He's about 12, 13, 14 feet tall. That's fine. And then he's going to fight Goliath, which is awesome. And they're going at it pretty good. And then they do the opposite. They shrink down. They're fighting as little tiny dudes. And I like that. See, look at the size ratio there. They're both insect size here. And yet the Super Adaptoid is still a lot bigger than Goliath. So that further reinforced in my mind the idea that the Super Adaptoid is big. So even, relative to humans, he's a big guy. And I love that he uses a repulsor. It's I think the only time he uses it there. The Wasp comes in and zaps him. And again, the size ratios there, it's hard to understand what's going on. And man, the wings look terrible there. The police roll up. They're trying to keep people from stepping on Goliath. Wasp grabs the Adaptoid and expands up to normal size. And interesting that what was going on in the TV shows that year in '67, you had there was a King Kong and a Beatles cartoon, as well as the Fantastic Four with the Human Torch. No Herbie yet. Herbie would be later. I want to see this Journey to the Center of the Earth cartoon, man. That looks cool. I've never heard of that. That's way before my time. I got to look on YouTube, see if I can find that. But anyway, and Casper, King Kong, and instead of Fay Ray, it's some little blonde-headed kid, so whatever. There's the Beatles cartoon looks cool too. All right, because this was during their heyday, right? So they were a thing. All right, so the Wasp throws the little Super Adaptoid like a baseball or like a golf ball, I guess, and he grows as he flies and crashes. That's a pretty cool shot, a foreshortened shot of Hawkeye there. That's for Don Heck, man. That's some good stuff, right? Look at that. That's a nice panel. I love this one too. Another proportion, depth. It's got depth. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. But the Adaptoid shoots off a an arrow, which I'm not sure where the arrow came from. I guess his body just produced it out of his robotic body. Again, and Captain America's fighting him. Hercules hits him, but they both have strength, tremendous strength. Wanda does some stuff to him, makes a tree come down. Oh, okay, wait a minute. The Super Adaptoid, and he's got those, I guess that's the Wasp's wings then, if it's not Yellow Jacket, because Yellow Jacket wasn't a thing yet, right? They look more like Yellow Jacket's wings, but I guess they're supposed to be the Wasp's wings. All right. So Wanda says, I've spent long hours perfecting my powers, which you wouldn't know if you read the comics. Now, if I can, and so how she's written, I don't blame her. I blame the writers. If I can only control this spell flawlessly, and it's a spell. So that's interesting too. It's not a hex. It's not a mutant hex power blast or whatever, reality distortion like she does. It's a spell, she says. So the Adaptoid knocks down a tree and uses it to kind of block the. And now she says, I hope to stun him by using a hex to disintegrate the tree, but I failed, and now my powers are greatly drained. So we're back to Wanda, getting weak very quickly. Super Adaptoid uses his Quicksilver speed. What I would say the flaw here for the Adaptoid is he's only using like one power at a time, kind of like, I guess, Ultra Boy in the Legion of Superheroes. I didn't realize I'd be making so many Legion of Superheroes references, but here we are. So he doesn't seem to know how to use them in concert. Maybe he can only use one at a time, but he's going too long in between attacks. He needs to kind of, who's good at that is the Super Skrull. Super Skrull could combine his attacks, combine his powers, even though he's only got the 4. And so the Adaptoid takes out Quicksilver with a park bench. And what he was trying to do, though, was get the Adaptoid to use too many of his powers at the same time, and he basically short circuits and falls over smoking down. Now, I want to say before we wrap this issue up, while we're talking about the Super Adaptoid, he shows, the only other time I remember seeing him show up before he becomes completely different, right? He needs to be green. That's his thing. He's a big green 15-foot, 12-foot tall robot. He shows up in a Marvel 2-in-1 issue around 1980, 81, 82, somewhere in there. And he still kind of looked like this, a little different. I think he was floating in the negative zone or something. So I do kind of want to go back and check his appearances. I should have done that before the show here, but I didn't, obviously. So I apologize for not having an encyclopedic knowledge of the Super Adaptoid's previous and subsequent appearances. But again, he does fight the Thing and some other characters in an issue of like issue 75 of Marvel 2-in-1, something like that. So he does come back, and I think later on they determined that he's basically like he's like a fragment of the cosmic cube or something. I think they later determined he's able to absorb powers this way because he has a piece of the cosmic cube in him or something, and that actually makes sense. That works. And also one other thing I want to say about him while I'm on the subject. When Bobby Polite and I were first creating the Sentinels, my superhero novel series, which you should all, shaking my finger at you should all be reading, 9-volume superhero novels. When we did in the very first, maybe the first or second book, I think it's in the second book, maybe the third, in the first trilogy. I just put it that way. In the first trilogy, we have these robots called Zorexes, and Bobby came up with the idea that Zorex was Xerox spelled backwards, and they're basically our robots that copy powers. Because we had to do it. Come on, the whole point of those books originally was to do our own versions of the cool things that we loved as kids. So we had the Zorex, which is the big android that copied powers. What a great name Bobby came up with. All right, so Quicksilver is up and coming back to join them. And he says, yeah, he figured it out. It was his idea. The android must be bound so he can never menace anyone again. Hawkeye says, yet he is to be pitied almost as much as feared, for it was humans who, no, I guess that's still Quicksilver. Hawkeye wouldn't talk like that. Humans who planned to use him as a merciless engine of destruction. But Cap says he was created by evil humans, Pietro, men who would have used him to bring both Homo sapiens and mutants under their domination. Remember that. And Wanda thinks to herself, Steve senses, as do I, a strange bitterness in Pietro's voice. I wonder what ill this may bode for the future. Bingo, that's where we're going. Pietro is starting to get resentful of how mutants are treated, which is something Roy is bringing over from what was going on, I think, in the X-Men. Because the idea seemed to be that in the X-Men, mutants were all hated and feared, good guys and bad guys. But if they somehow came over and became Avengers, then suddenly it was like the Fantastic Four. We don't care what powers you have. You're just a cool hero. So the idea here is that maybe even becoming an Avenger doesn't insulate you and inoculate you from people being after you, people being down on you. But interestingly enough, even as he's thinking this, the people are all cheering for the Avengers at this big celebration. And Avengers Day is going on here. And this is actually what Kurt Busiek and George Perez kind of pick up on with Avengers Volume 3, number 10, which is the issue that has like Avengers Day going on again. They're having a big parade. And that issue is very important, special to me, from, I think, 2000 maybe, because that was the first issue where I'm actually mentioned by name in the letter column. I didn't have a letter printed in it yet. That wouldn't happen for like a couple more years, unfortunately. But somebody else mentions me in the letters column and mentions the Avengers Assemble website, the same one where you find these videos. And way back in 2000, when the page had only been around 5 years. And also, the Jarvis heads, our little group, gets mentioned on the cover. If you look at the cover of Avengers Volume 3, number 10, we'll talk about this again several years from now when we get to those issues, right? But on the cover of those issues, we see a woman with a Jarvis Heads and Proud of It t-shirt, and that was the name of one of the names of our group was the Jarvis Heads. All right, so that gets us to the end of Avengers 45, one of my favorite issues, the Super Adaptoid up against the Avengers in a great one-shot with Avengers Parade going on, Avengers Day. Now, I've got a note. They say here that next issue is When Rides the Whirlwind, which is just a terrible title because writhing is like lying on the ground going, you know. He doesn't writhe, he whirls or spins or, you know, whatever. And so they're going to change the name of that before we get to that issue in just a minute. All right. So I don't remember anything super important from the letters page here, but we're going to start to see some people commenting on the new direction of the book after now that Roy Thomas has taken over. Okay. All right, there we go. So let's go ahead and bring up issue number 46. And then I got to remember to tell you something when we get to the end of 46. All right, so here comes 46, The Agony and the Anthill. The cover of 45 is one of my favorites, and I have to admit I do absolutely love the cover of 46 too. This is such a great cover, right? I mean, everything about this cover is fantastic. You got floating heads at the bottom, the agony and the anthill, the head of Whirlwind, and I mean that's clearly the best part of his costume is that wacky bullet green helmet with the little top spinner thing on there, like somebody's gonna reach down and grab his head and spin him around. I love that. Behind this mask of metal lurks the senses shattering Whirlwind. Fasten your safety belts, true believers, because Ant-Man is back and how. Which is funny because he still looks like Goliath here, but he is going to take steps toward becoming Ant-Man again. And I like that we still have that they have the ants red, which is appropriate. They're supposed to be red and not black. And then in this story, and then we still have the same faces up in the corner cover box. The Avengers are at 6. You know, hold on a minute. I didn't I didn't check and see if they, I want to go back and look at something. I know I'm calling an audible here, but I want to go back and check something at the end of 45. Sorry, this is just doing that thing again that we saw before where it gets all kerflooey. Let me try it again. Sorry to, it's even taking my mouse away. This is really bizarre. All right, I apologize. Let me try one more time. I think I basically had to kill the program. Still doing it. All right. Well, I'm going to open it with, I'll have to open it with Acrobat. All right, let me bring you back. I know you guys don't want to see me. You want to see the comic book, and darn tootin' you do. So we're going to just go to Acrobat here for a second because it's at least it'll let me show it to you. So the other one was just messing up too much. All right. So I want to check and see if this is where Hercules. I'm not Avenger. Okay, so what did I miss? It must have been back before he attacked then, right? We're going to figure this out. We're going to get to the bottom of it. Somewhere in here. Aha, there it is. All right, so after Thor and Iron Man leave, which is strange, that's when Captain America says, so on behalf of all of us, may I thank you for proclaiming today Avengers Day and pledge will never betray your trust. Goliath, you have an announcement. You know it, Cap, and it concerns our guest Hercules. Originally, we intended to bestow this honor upon two, but the lovely Black Widow has stated that she will fight in costume no more. Thus, we gratefully proclaim, and of course, that didn't last long. We gratefully proclaim that the mighty Hercules to be a full-fledged Avenger for the duration of his stay on Earth, and he accepts. Okay, there it is. So, Hercules becomes an Avenger officially in Avengers 45. And that gets us back to 46, and he is indeed. And this is why I said that seemed like a fill-in issue, except for the fact that Hercules becomes an Avenger, which is part of this ongoing, subplot thing with Hercules. So that's interesting. All right, the agony in the anthill. You got to love these shots where the Avengers are just hanging out in the mansion. I mean, that's a great. I always just enjoy that, just seeing them like just hanging out, and they're all worried about different things. There's something that Cap's worried about that's going on in his own Tales of Suspense. Not going to worry about that. Wanda's worried. Pietro isn't really thinking. Everybody else is busy talking and thinking. Love this. Natasha and Clint, they haven't. I saw something that said they still haven't given his name at this point. They still haven't even said his name is Clint Barton. So we're still calling him Hawkeye. But Natasha finally got out of the hospital, so she missed the fight with the Super Adaptoid, but she's out now. And they call her the beauteous Black Widow or whatever. So she does. She looks nice there. And she and Wanda have the same color hair, oddly enough here. They hug. Then Jan shows up with her chauffeur and then dismisses him. Off he goes. By the way, we are back to John Buscema at this point. Roy Thomas is still writing, but John Buscema is back to being the writer again. The artist again. So we have a nice little room full of superheroes here. And they change clothes. Hercules even shaves, which is interesting. And so Cap and Hercules are going to go to a baseball game. That's cool. The Whirlwind is doing his villainous thing. What a great panel that is. Fantastic. And we see a little bit of his origin when he was the human top, which is almost as bad as the Trapster being Paste Pot Pete. If they were going to do a super villain team of guys with horrible, lame names, then Paste Pot Pete and the Human Top would have to be in it. There's no doubt. But the Trapster and the Whirlwind are great names. All right, so he wants revenge on Goliath. He's after Pym, just like the Super Adaptoid was after Cap. He's after the Pyms. Meanwhile, there's what do you call it? An ant colony in Avengers Mansion, which you know that Jarvis is not happy about. So they turn down going to the baseball game to stay and work on. Pym is wanting to do something with their powers. He's worried that Hercules is going to overshadow him as the strong man, so he needs to do something to his powers, which he will do a little bit here, and then of course later on he'll do the whole yellow jacket thing. So Pym is always tampering. And I had a thought, by the way. I'm gonna go ahead and mention this now while I'm thinking about it. What is the big flaw in Henry Pym other than he's always kind of feels inferior? He's a great scientist, yet overshadowed by Reed Richards and Tony Stark and maybe Bruce Banner, I don't know. And he's a great superhero, but always overshadowed by Thor and Hercules and these other strong guys. He always seems to have a kind of an inferiority complex. He's jealous. He worries about Jan, and to be fair, Jan gives him plenty of reason to worry, right? So, because she's always talking about other guys, really kind of annoying. So he's always tampering with his powers. And I put this to you. What if his mental problems, which really come to the forefront in like the 160s when Ultron starts messing with his brain too, and he forgets the last several years, and he attacks the Avengers and everything on behalf and then later on, of course, we know he ends up punching Jan. They get a divorce. He goes to prison. All that stuff that happens later, which is so horrible for Pym. What if all that started with him doing all this messing with his mind to control the ants? What if the influence back on him from the ants was a negative one that made him more intellectually, emotionally unstable? It's something to think about, I think. So anyway, Whirlwind attacks. They fight. Whirlwind uses Hank's machinery to shrink them permanently down. They can't change size. And he grabs them and chucks them in the anthill. So now they're in the anthill with ants that they've already said they can't control, and they don't have their gear. They don't have their ant control gear on. So we're going to get this whole man in the anthill thing going on. They can see through the glass Whirlwind putting a bomb in the wall in Avengers Mansion, and then they have to fight an ant. They find a piece of wire. At least they have a weapon. Now the Avengers come back early, and Quicksilver and Cap are going to fight Whirlwind a good bit. This particularly bugs Pietro because he feels like he should be fast enough to stand up to Whirlwind, and they get a kind of a little rivalry going where the two green fast guys start getting jealous of each other. Quicksilver wants to make sure he doesn't get humiliated by another fast guy, and Whirlwind is he wants to kill the Pyms and blow up Avengers Mansion. He doesn't want to get sidetracked by Quicksilver. All right, so the Pyms are still fighting ants in the anthill. This would be the agony in the anthill of the agony in the anthill. Ants about to kill Hank. Jan comes in and kills the queen, and now all the ants kind of bow down to her. She's the new queen of the anthill. So now Hank goes and constructs a device to have in a big hurry out of the parts inside this anthill. He constructs a device that lets him communicate with the ants, and now they're going to get out. Meanwhile, Captain America is still fighting Whirlwind, and Hank is able to get out. He uses a microphone here to boost his voice to warn them about the bomb. Quicksilver grabs the bomb and runs it out in the ocean where it blows up. And then we get this. This is the moment that really starts sowing the seeds for where Quicksilver is going to start going now, right? These two panels here, as Quicksilver's running by, they see him, they recognize him, and he hears them talking, and they're saying, it's that fast-flying freak Quicksilver. He must have had something to do with that explosion a minute ago. I don't trust that silver-haired creep or any mutant. Neither do I. The rest of the Avengers are all human. That's not true. But Quicksilver's a mutant, like that nutty sister of his. I don't trust either of them. So Quicksilver, who's supposed to be a hero, starts thinking, even while I save their Homo sapien lives, their hearts are still full of mistrust and fear. It's as I've always thought, yet not dared to admit until Roy Thomas took over. No mutant will ever be accepted by the accursed humans. He just called us the accursed humans, and he's an Avenger. So you can see Quicksilver's days as a crusading heroic Avenger are definitely numbered at this point. The time draws near when I will bear their insults and suspicions no longer, but will lash back. You're starting to sound like Magneto, maybe? Mm-hmm. All right, so Cap uses the machine to make them both bigger, but there's this whole bit of dialogue here where they go too far. I expected them to be like 7 feet tall, because he says, I hope I reacted in time to turn it off. You gave us too much of a dose. It's doing something to our powers. He can sense it somehow, right? Now, the Whirlwind escapes because for the last, let's see, for a half, 1.5, for 2.5, for the last 2.5 pages, we've been pretty much ignoring Whirlwind, and he just jumps up and flies away. The Pims are more, they're not worried about him. They're worried about how something's going on with their powers. Quicksilver comes back to get another shot at Whirlwind. He's told, oh, we just kind of let Whirlwind go while we were, dealing with this shrinking thing, growing thing. And Pietro's mad. He's like, the one called the Whirlwind is interested in gaining a reputation. He will make it well known that he downed me. That is the price I pay for relying on humans. That would be you two guys. Instead of striking back myself with the full power of Homo Superior. And Goliath is like, look, Pietro, I just got here, so to speak. I don't know what's eating you, but if you feel somebody's cheated you out of a fight, I'll be glad to oblige. And Cap steps in, as he says, to be the peacemaker, settles him down. Pietro kind of regains control of himself, says, forgive me, Goliath, my friend. You and the lovely Wasp were endangered, while I thought only of my foolish pride. All right, so Pietro kind of reels it back in for the moment, but for how long? And while Pym is thinking about, I now have the powers of Ant-Man as well as Giant Man, and we can see where his costume is going to be changing a little bit going forward now. Even as we see that, thus ends the first chapter in the new life of Hank Pym and the Wonderful Wasp, I would say, and Quicksilver. But stranger, even more undreamed of events lie in store for them and their fellow Avengers in the uncertain future. Okay, that's generic, could be anything. But next-ish, would you believe Magneto? So I think this whole Pietro, Magneto, angry, Homo Superior, accursed humans thing, it's boiling to a froth immediately. And you can see that coming. All right. I thought there was something in the letters page. Oh, this is cool. So in the very first letter, Martin O'Hearn of Brighton, Massachusetts mentioned something from issue 43 that I missed, which is that there was a boxing poster on page 5, panel 2, Slammer Sauron versus Freddy Frodo. And Roy Thomas is famous for being the guy that would go out and get other properties and bring them to Marvel. So like Roy Thomas was responsible for Conan the Barbarian being at Marvel. I believe Roy was responsible for Star Wars. Those were two of the biggest selling comics that Marvel put out in the 70s and 80s, was Conan the Barbarian and Star Wars. And Roy went and got them both. And Roy was always looking at these outside properties and, trying to figure out how to get them into Marvel in ways that Stan never really did. And so you can tell Roy just read Lord of the Rings. It's 1967. That's when all the hippies were reading Lord of the Rings, right? And so he had to throw in a reference there. All right. I think, and remember how Roy's been begging people for shorter letters? Dear Stan, Roy, and John, you wanted brief letters, so I've been giving you one. The Red Guardian is great. Richard Pollock, Single Drive, Ellenville, New York. I love it. All right. So we've come to the end of 45 and 46, and I have a little announcement for you, which is David Wright and I did a 2-hour podcast a couple of years ago where David specifically requested that we talk about Avengers, I want to say 47 through 62, kind of a big chunk of the Roy Thomas era. So we've already done those as a podcast. So what I've done is take the audio of that podcast and made it into a YouTube video. You don't get to see the issue the way I do here on the YouTube channel, but you'll just have the logo basically. But it's David and I kind of going through those issues and talking about their highlights. I just didn't see the need in doing the same thing over again that we already did. Plus, this kind of moves us along. So the really good news here is after you listen to David and me break down 47 through 62 in one shot, we'll be to 63, right? We're getting a nice jump on forward. So join me again in our next installment of the video version where we will pick up with Avengers 63. And I am going to go ahead and give you guys a quick early look, right, at what that's going to look like. There it is. And we're back to Goliath, but I think this is a different Goliath. I want to say this is the Clint Barton Goliath. We'll have the Vision to play around with. We've got Yellow Jacket in there. We're taking a big leap forward. And look at the corner box. Goliath now has the little V eyebrows thing that he gains after the events of this past issue we just looked at. We've got Black Panther. We've got the Vision. That's the same Jan that's been there the whole time. Probably the same Hawkeye, honestly. So big things, big changes coming. And I'm looking forward to it. So join me on our next episode. We're going to jump to Avengers 63 and pick back up there and make a run toward the hundreds. It should be a lot of fun. We will see you guys down the road. Remember, please help us out. Go to www.avengersassemble.net, avengersassemble.net. Click on the button to become a patron. We need your support to keep the program going. I want to get all the way up through 400 and maybe into volume 2, and volume 3, right? It'll be fun to review volume 2. I got to admit, it will be. So, and we might do another couple of package. In fact, I think we're going to do another package deal because David and I did the Kree Skrull War. So we'll get to jump ahead a little bit too. You'll get to hear that, and then we'll jump ahead again too. So, all right. We'll see you guys down the road. And in the meantime, Avengers Assemble.